My name is Laurier and welcome to my channel Old Dirty History, where I like to talk about whatever historic topic, person, place, or event that I want to talk about. And now that I have made a complete fool of myself, I would like to talk to you about history's most brutal and disturbing band of all time, Mayhem. Hence the corpse paint. And you can't really see the whole thing, but I got my little, my little something, my little hat going on, and I'm gothed up for the metal gods. This is of course spooky season, which like many other people is my favorite season. Last year I decided to dress up as a 16th century Tudor courtesan, and this year I wanted to switch it up a little bit. I didn't want to do a stereotypical event in history that was kind of creepy and scary like the witch trials or something like that. I wanted to do something a little different, and I love metal, so this idea was born. I'm not just a fan of death metal, I'm a fan of all the metals. I like the prog metals. I like the thrash metals. I even like the new metals. Yes, I confess, I grew up listening to these guys. I still like them a lot. They're amazing. Doing research on a topic like this is extremely hard because you don't have a lot of valid sources. It's not like I can go into some archive or some library and go like, I want to look up everything that has to do with the darkest black metal band in history. No. I did the best that I could research-wise, but in the event that something I say might be dated or inaccurate, please feel free to let me know in the comments. A lot of the sources that I've used to research this video were from interviews that were conducted with previous members of the band. Last thing, and I'll get straight into it, I have to give a disclaimer because this is a very graphic topic. It's very dark. I will be talking about all of these things over here. We're gonna go over all of this shit. Okay. Oh, and yes, most importantly, this is not meant to be a comprehensive video on the history of Mayhem. I'm just going to be focusing on the really messed up stuff that happened within this band. So if you are looking for something that's more like a documentary about the entire history of the band, I recommend this video by DeBerk321. They did an excellent job covering the history of this band, but don't check it out right now. Okay. Check them out after you finish mine. Thank you. So Mayhem is a Norwegian black metal band that formed in Oslo, Norway in 1984. And many people define Mayhem as the founders of black metal, even though their history is riddled with just death and drama and all kinds of shenanigans. Mayhem created this variant of the genre that was a bit different. It was much more chaotic and a bit more dark, if you could believe it. Their goal was to take the genre and just take it to its extreme entirely. And many fans of the genre at the time ridiculed this style that they were pioneering, but little did they know that Mayhem would go on to influence several bands in the future, and they would also become legends in their own right. The band was formed by a group of 3 friends who had similar music interests. They included Øystein, Aarseth, also known as Euronymous, and by the way, his name translates to Prince of Death in Greek. I know, very metal. And Euronymous, he was on guitar and he also did vocals. Necro Butcher, whose government name was Jorn Stubberud, was on bass and vocals, and Kjetil Mannheim was on drums and piano. They came up with the band's name from a song by the band Venom, which was called Mayhem with Mercy. By the way, I will do the best I can to pronounce these names correctly. So this was the core band from 1984 to about 1986. From this point on, the lineup for Mayhem would just be all over the place up to the present day. It was very chaotic. It was mayhem. The name of their first demo was Pure Fucking Armageddon, and it was released in 1986. They had a vocalist named Messiah join to provide vocals for the recording session, but luckily for him, he left shortly thereafter. Pure Fucking Armageddon did not make the band blow up or anything like that, but this demo was passed around in the underground black metal scene quite a bit. They promoted the hell out of this album as much as they could with what little resources they had. I don't know why I kept saying album. It was a demo. Okay. They promoted the heck out of their demo. One way that Mayhem was able to achieve this really high level of notoriety that they would eventually reach was because of a lot of the satanic imagery that they incorporated with their overall image and style. And we're talking about the 1980s, so this is a big deal. People didn't like this. And you also have to consider that this is during the time of the satanic panic, where people just thought that everybody was sacrificing potatoes and they were worshiping the devil.
Most people don't realize that 80% of all toys on the market have occultic influence, and these are the most popular.
It says here that it actually makes the wings move, so let me look at that. Isn't that amazing?
And do you remember those verses in the book of Revelation about the flying beast with the riders on them?
This could actually be taken from Revelations.
Sure, it looks like it.
Satan made me kill my parents, that type of period. Oh, shit. Per previous band member MAYHEM, they were heavily influenced by the works of Aleister Crowley and other dark texts, as well as vampirism and the whole gothic lifestyle. They took a lot of quote-unquote dark imagery that already existed in the metal scene, and they just multiplied it by like 1,000. It wasn't until they released their album Death Crush in 1987 that the band had finally found their own unique sound. And it was also at this point that they began to form a cult following of fans from all over the world. But it wasn't their goal to become famous rock stars who were rich and had all the bitches. Death Crush was a work of art where they were able to really express themselves in this album. And so after the release of Death Crush, they took a little hiatus. Now, everything up until this point has sounded pretty normal, you know, just normal band stuff, people getting together. I mean, minus the satanic imagery, but hey, you know, to each their own, right? It is at this point that shit really starts to get weird. Around Christmas time in 1988, MAYHEM welcomed a new drummer whose name was Jean-Axel Blomberg, who went by Hellhammer. They also welcomed a new vocalist, and his name was Pelle Ohlin, but he went by Dead. D-E-A-D. Dead. You heard right. That was his name. And the arrival of Dead would forever change the fate of this band. At the time that they met Dead, he was living in Norway on welfare in a small village outside of Oslo. And it didn't take the band long to realize how odd Dead really was. I wonder what gave it away. Maybe it was his freaking name. Maybe that was what it was. He's been described by some of his band members as having a very dark sense of humor and also being very close, potentially obsessed with the idea of death. See, Dead had a near-death experience during an ice skating accident at just 10 years old, and he died upon arrival at the hospital, but was somehow revived. This obsession with death formed within Dead at a very young age, and he would take this with him for the rest of his life until the day he died. When fellow band member MAYHEM first met Dead, he did not like him at all. MAYHEM was all about enjoying life, despite the very dark lyrics and the dark tone of MAYHEM's music, while Dead was really fucking depressing. I mean, I'm not saying he was depressed. I don't know. I can't diagnose him, but he did depressing things. Euronymous, however, was fascinated with Dead's obsession with death. However, they did not get along. In fact, they quarreled quite a bit, and sometimes their arguments even got pretty violent. Over time, just a lot of bad blood formed between Dead and Euronymous. So I want to give you guys a little bit of a background on Dead's quirks, if you will. One of those quirks is that Dead would sleep with dead birds underneath of his pillow, so he could be closer to death. And he would also take their carcasses and put them into bags and huff them like glue. And prior to Dead joining MAYHEM, they already had this really dark satanic vibe going on, but when Dead joined, it just elevated the band to a whole other level of this very dark, you know, satanic look. So Dead would come out on stage wearing corpse paint, like I am, if you want to call this corpse paint. And he would also wear clothing that he would bury underground for days on end so that he would smell like death. I can't even imagine standing next to this guy. Like, you're already sweating on stage. You got the lights shining down on you, and that shit gets hot. I've dated several musicians, and I can tell you right now, that does not sound right. I sound like a groupie. Oh my God. One thing I've heard is that those lights on that stage are hot as fuck. So you already sweating balls, and you got this dude standing next to you smelling like death and huffing dead animals. Sounds like a fun night. Oh, and he would slit his wrists on stage while performing, and all the blood would splatter all over the people in the front row. I would want my money back. At some point, life became a little too much for Dead, and on April 8th in 1991, he wrote a suicide note, and he also wrote the lyrics for the song Life Eternal. He then cut his wrist and his throat, and then he just kind of walked around the house, waiting to die. But when it took too long, he took a shotgun and he turned it on himself. And his suicide note read, "Excuse all the blood." It was Euronymous that found Dead's body first. They were roommates at the time. Unlike a normal person, Euronymous decided, instead of calling the cops, to take pictures of his body. And actually, some of the pictures he took, he staged. He set the knife that he used to harm himself, as well as the gun, and he positioned them in a certain way next to Dead's body, and he took these pictures. And Euronymous also called their other bandmate, Necro Butcher, and told him that Dead was dead and that he was taking these pictures of him. And like a normal person, Necro Butcher did not like this at all. But Euronymous didn't care. He didn't care that Necro Butcher wanted him to get rid of these photographs and stop all this really messed up shit. In fact, one of the photos Euronymous took ended up on the cover of one of their albums, Dawn of the Blackhearts, which was released in 1995. I'm only going to show bits and pieces of the album cover here and blur some of this stuff out because I'm not going to include that on this channel. But if you would like to look up the full image, Google that shit. Euronymous also made claims that he consumed parts of Dead's brain. And he even started giving people pieces of Dead's body that he found throughout the area where he killed himself. And he would give these body parts to people he deemed worthy, the people who weren't posers, like me, like my poser ass. And he and another band member named Hellhammer made amulets out of some of Dead's skull fragments that they found underneath of his bed. It was at this point that Necro Butcher wanted nothing to do with Mayhem. He lost his friend, and his other friend was doing some really disturbing shit that he did not like, and so he left the band. Now, at this point, we are in the year 1991, and the only remaining members are Hellhammer and Euronymous. Dead is dead, and Necro Butcher is out of the picture. Eventually, another member would join the band to replace Necro Butcher on bass and also provide vocals. And his name was Øystein Johansen, also known as Occultus. How could anyone want to join this band after all this crazy shit just unfolded? It was also at this point that Euronymous started to really feel his darker side more, and that included his ego. He kind of started to become a little elitist. He was really feeling himself. He became more theatric and was completely consumed by the image and culture around Mayhem and the black metal scene as a whole. And he also fully embraced Satanism at this point as well. And I mean, I understand some of the ego trip, you know, he became a central figure within the black metal scene, but you know, there's nothing wrong with being a little modest now. Modesty never hurt anybody. But he was the cool guy, and he really despised trendy tryhards trying to wiggle their way into the metal scene. The people who weren't real fans. You know, posers like myself.
That's pretty underground. What's their sound?
Neo-industrial, post-emo, punk, funk, electro crash, thrashabilly, screamo, house, ghetto tech.
Anyway, he wanted to beat the shit out of all trendy people, per an interview that I read that may or may not be true. Like I said, the sources can be whack for this video. Euronymous also opened a store named Helvete in Oslo. Helvete is Norwegian for hell. Very unique. Also, I tried really hard to find out how to pronounce Helvete, but I got varying pronunciations across the board. So In an interview, he is documented stating that he was considering making the store totally dark inside. And I'm not talking about paint. He wanted his customers to enter the store in complete darkness, carrying torches so that they could see the records as they walked down the aisles in his store. God, why would you make it harder for people to buy your shit? It was also around this time that, once again, bad blood would ensue amongst band members. Death threats were thrown all over the place, especially by Euronymous. Euronymous sent a death threat to Occultus, and Occultus was like, "You don't have to tell me twice. Deuces." So he left the band, and once again, they found themselves in need of a bassist. But eventually, a young musician would catch Euronymous' eye, and his name was Varg Vikernes, but he went by Count Grishnock. I can't with these names. Count Grishnock is from Lord of the Rings. He's like an orc lord or something like that, which is cool. I like that. But you're trying to be all dark and hardcore and heavy, and you choose the name Count Grishnock. I don't know. I don't know, man. That sounds a little neckbeardy if you ask me. Nothing wrong with the neckbeards. Actually, there's a lot wrong with the neckbeards. I don't like them. Racist, homophobic people, and neckbeards. I don't like them. So anyway, I'm not going to call him Count Grishnock. We're going to call him Varg. So Varg, he was working on a solo project that Euronymous was really impressed by. And this solo project was called Burzum, which he literally made by himself. He played all the instruments, did the vocals, it was all him. So when Euronymous decided he wanted to be a businessman, he not only opened his own record store, but he also created his own record label. And this label was called Death Like Silence Productions. And so he decided he wanted to put Varg on. But Varg was something else. This is when shit really hits the fan. Part 2. He added an extra level of fuckery to Mayhem. Like Euronymous, Varg was very into the theatrics, very into the whole idea of Satanism, all the dark stuff, right? So eventually he declared his hatred of Christianity. And to do this, he burned down several churches. He even used a photograph he took of one of the churches he burned down, and he used it as his cover art for one of his albums. And this was also to promote his album as well, this solo project. In a 1993 interview with the press, Varg stated that this was all for show and promotion, but then it turned into something more serious than he anticipated. How the hell, like, it's serious from the jump, dude. Like, you're burning down a place of worship, and I'm not a religious person, but I respect people's faith. I respect people's freedom to worship whatever they want. And so I'm like, how did it just become serious over time, sir? Makes sense. And when asked if he regretted it, he said it was good advertisement, free PR. It was a bargain. He's also quoted as having said it was to spread fear and evil and to protest Christianity. So who really knows his reasoning behind it, whether it was for free press or cover art for his album, to spread fear, whatever. Teenagers, am I right? Many copycat church burnings began to pop up all over Norway and outside of the country. Mayhem's church burning shit is still having influence on people today. Just last year, this idiot was sentenced to 25 years in prison after pleading guilty for burning down several historically black churches in Louisiana. And so he has to pay $2.6 million to 3 churches in restitution. His goal, you might be wondering, to promote his black metal band just like Mayhem did. I'd love to know how this shithead is going to be able to pay $2.6 million. Maybe he comes from a family with money, who knows? So with all this darkness and strife that continued to follow the group, they eventually channeled it into this masterpiece of an album titled De Mysteries Dom Satanis. And when this album was created, the lineup was Attila on vocals, Euronymous on guitar, Varg on bass, Hellhammer on drums, and Blackthorn on rhythm guitar. And if you haven't heard this album, I highly recommend checking it out. The full album is on YouTube. If you are a fan of metal, especially death metal, it's beautiful, man. It is great. Also, side note, because I don't really know where to put this, it's just like random information, but I came across in several like places when I was doing research that Varg was apparently a skinhead, a neo-Nazi. Maybe he still is. I don't know. Not really sure, you know, if this is true or not, but I did come across this quite a bit. So take that as you will. So being the shit starter that Euronymous was, He and Varg also eventually had a falling out as well. And this beef eventually led to Varg murdering Euronymous. There are conflicting reports as to why Varg murdered Euronymous. In an interview, Necro Butcher claims that Varg wanted to leave Euronymous' record label, but Euronymous told Varg, nope. Euronymous pretty much told Varg that he would not let him part ways from the record label until he gave him the 4 albums he was owed. It was from that point on that they started to send death threats to each other. MAYHEM also describes Euronymous as not being the most likable guy in the world. Not saying he deserved to die or anything like that, never, but that he pissed off a lot of people. Apparently, he liked to throw death threats all over the place. I mean, he was tossing them bitches out like candy. Death threat for you. Would you like a death threat? How about you? Top of the morning to you, death threat? Now, Varg's version of the story is a little different and chilling. Varg states that Euronymous threatened him and planned on kidnapping him by knocking him out and then tying him up. He would then take him out into the forest and record himself torturing Varg to make a snuff film. Varg also claimed that this information was passed down to him from a mutual friend. Now, although Euronymous was saying all this heinous shit that he was going to do to Varg behind Varg's back, Varg claims that Euronymous maintained being friendly. You know, he was kind of doing this little front like, oh, hello, good friend. You know, everything is going great. Jolly good show. Here. He claims that Euronymous sent him this friendly letter where he expressed that he wanted to meet Varg to sign some contract that had to do with the music label. But Varg knew, in his heart of hearts, that Euronymous was going to murder him. So Varg did a long drive to Oslo to meet with Euronymous to sign this contract. And when Varg arrived at Euronymous' home, Euronymous quickly learned that Varg was about that life. It wasn't just talk and threats. He was about that action. When Varg was arrested for the murder of Euronymous, he tried to feign innocence and gave authorities an alibi, but it did not hold up for long. When word got out to the media about his trial, it blew up across all of Norway. This became a huge trial, and it makes total sense. Couple Satanism with scary music that people don't know about and murder. I mean, you're going to have a media frenzy. Varg was eventually sentenced to 21 years in prison, the longest sentence allowed in Norway's prison system, with the exception of their recent 30-year maximum sentence for crimes that fall under genocide and other war crimes. But Varg was released after just serving 16 years of his sentence. And just in case you're not familiar with Norway's incarceration system, like I said, 21 years is typically the max prison sentence that they give out. There is no such thing as life imprisonment over there. So you really have to fuck up to get 21 years in prison. And also, prisoners have so many more rights in comparison to prisoners in places like the US. When I look at the interviews that Varg has done in prison, I'm like, this dude is wearing a snapback and a sweater? Like, what? Why is he not wearing an orange jumpsuit or one of them stripe joints, you know, black and white stripes? Like, what is going on here? But yeah, they get much better rights. You know, they get access to healthcare and addiction treatment, education, libraries, and they also retain their right to vote. It's really interesting. I don't know. I guess I'm just so used to how fucked up things are over here in America that it kind of blows my mind. I just feel like the rest of the world needs to follow suit with what Norway is doing. I'm just saying, I think they're doing it right. But anyway, it's kind of mind-blowing to me that he only served 16 years after taking someone's life. While there's a lot of stuff out there that says that Euronymous was a dick, you know, he wasn't the greatest guy, he was a jerk, but I mean, did he really deserve to die? And we weren't there. You know, I don't know if he came after Varg and was like on that Michael Myers shit. I don't know, you know, but it's a sad story. After Euronymous' death and Varg's imprisonment, the band was reformed in 1995. The lineup was Necro Butcher on bass. He came back. Necro Butcher came back. He was like, now that all the crazy people are gone, I am back in the band. Smart guy. I like him the most, I think. Good on you, Necro Butcher. Hellhammer was on drums, Blasphemer on guitar, and Maniac on vocals for the next 9 years. They would produce 7 albums over the course of that time, but of course, in typical Mayhem fashion, the lineup would eventually change again over time. But compared to their previous years, things remain much calmer amongst the band members going forward. Although these guys have a super dark past, their legendary status in the metal community and the metal scene cannot be denied. I really enjoyed making this video, and I honestly think it's going to be one of my favorites. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please stay safe out there and have a happy Halloween. Bye.